All right, let's dive into a landmark court case that really gets into a deeply personal and, well, legally tangled question. It's a story about family, about property rights, and what happens when the law has to step into the messiest parts of our lives. I mean, just imagine this for a second. The home you've lived in for years is a rental, and the lease, it's in your husband's name. Then one day, poof, he's just gone, leaving you and the kids behind. And then the eviction notice shows up at your door. What do you even do? You don't have a contract with the landlord. Do you have any rights at all? Well, this wasn't some hypothetical for a woman named Achala Anand. This was her actual life, and her fight for answer went all the way to India's Supreme Court, setting a precedent that, still impacts families today. Okay, first up, Section 1, a home on the line. Before we get into all the legal arguments, you really have to understand the human story that's at the absolute heart of this case. Just look at the sheer amount of time we're talking about here. Her husband leaves in 1983. The landlord doesn't even start the eviction case for another 8 years. 7 years after that, while she's still fighting to keep her home, the couple officially divorces. And the final verdict from the Supreme Court? That didn't come until 2005. I mean, think about that. More than 20 years after she was first abandoned, an entire generation grew up in that time. So, as you can imagine, that incredibly long battle led to a really fascinating legal puzzle. In Section 2, we're going to look at the clash of rights and laws that created this total legal knot for the court to figure out. On one side, you've got personal law. The Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act is pretty clear. A husband has a duty to maintain his wife, and that includes giving her a place to live. But on the other side, you've got property law. The Rent Control Act is also crystal clear. A landlord has a right to their property and can absolutely evict a tenant who isn't paying. So, which law wins out? This table really just lays out the whole standoff perfectly. You've got the wife, Achala Anand, fighting for her home. You've got the landlord, Appi Reddy, who's basically saying, hey, I don't have a contract with her and I'm not getting paid. And then there's the husband, the one person with the actual lease, and he's nowhere to be found. This is the knot the Supreme Court had to untangle. The one person who's legally responsible is the only one not even in the room. So how in the world did the court even start to unravel this thing? Well, that brings us to Section 3, the deserted wife's shield. The court zeroed in on her specific situation, not just as a wife, but as a deserted wife, and decided she needed a special kind of protection. To do this, they brought in a concept from English law called deserted wife's equity. Just think of it like a protective legal shield. It basically says that when a husband up and abandons his wife in the family home, she doesn't just become a trespasser overnight. The law gives her a personal right to stay, and she can essentially step into her husband's shoes to defend their home. But this right wasn't a total blank check. The court created a really clear two-part test. First, the husband had to have completely given up the fight. Check. And second, her defense could only be as strong as his would have been. So in other words, she can't just invent new arguments out of thin air. She can only use the ones he had. And the core idea here is just so powerful. A wife shouldn't be made a victim twice. First, when her husband abandons her, and then again because he's legally negligent. The court basically created a new shield for social justice. But just as the shield was being forged, a single event in Achala Anand's life threatened to shatter it completely.
And this is where the story takes a massive turn. Section 4, when a wife becomes a stranger. Because while the court was busy figuring out this powerful new protection, the facts of the case on the ground changed completely.
Remember that timeline? In 1998, smack in the middle of all the eviction drama, Achala Anand and her husband's marriage was officially over. She was no longer a deserted wife. She was now a divorced wife. And in the eyes of the law, well, that changes everything. And this right here is the logical heart of the entire case. Let's break it down. A deserted wife is still legally married. Her rights flow straight from that marriage. But the second a wife is divorced, that legal tie is cut. From the landlord's point of view, she's now a total stranger to the rental agreement. So where does her right to a home come from now? It has to be explicitly spelled out in her divorce settlement. It's not automatic anymore. And that all brings us to the final act, Section 5, the verdict and its legacy. The court took this critical distinction and delivered a decision that was, in a way heartbreaking for Achala Anand personally, but it was a huge moment of clarity for Indian law. So in the end, the court had to dismiss her appeal. By the time the case got to them, she was a divorced woman, and she couldn't show any proof that her divorce settlement said her ex-husband had to provide that specific home for her. So her legal claim to that property had ended with her marriage. But recognizing the human side of all this, the court did grant her nearly a year as a grace period to find a new place to live. You know, the Chief Justice who wrote the judgment, R.C. Lahoti, said something that really gets to why this case matters so much. He admitted how unusual the whole thing was, but he saw it as an opportunity for innovation, a moment where law transforms into justice. So, what's the lasting legacy here? Two huge principles that still stand today. First, the court created that new legal shield to protect deserted wives from becoming homeless. And second, it created a massive warning sign. For anyone getting divorced, the right to a home can't just be assumed. It must be specifically dealt with and locked down in the final settlement. This case is such a powerful example of judges stepping in to create social justice where the law was, frankly, silent. But it leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? In a world that changes way faster than our laws can ever be written, how much do we want our judges to create law instead of just interpreting it? It's definitely something to think about.